Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you A Taste for Violence by Brett Halliday. And this is copyright 1949 by Dodd and Mead. You can see their red badge mystery imprint is here on the book. And it's one of these it's got a very nice color palette for its jacket art. Black, white, and red is always very, very striking. My issue with the cover, though, is that even though the art itself is interesting, it really doesn't have much to do with the book. You would think that this book took place sort of either on the docks or at a railroad station, or that there was something important about the railroad business in here, but it's really not. So the cover, not particularly reflective of the contents. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the title, too, as I get further into this video. So let's begin with a little bit about Brett Halliday. That was not his real name. His real name was Davis Dresser, and he wrote under a boatload of pseudonyms. More than 60 books in the Michael Shayne series, of which this book is one, fairly early entry. And in addition to writing many Michael Shayne books, he also wrote westerns and criticism and short stories. One of those great old prolific writers who, the publishing industry could barely keep up with their output, like John Creasy, although John Creasy really took it to the next level in terms of his output. An interesting thing about Halliday is that he was married. His first wife was Helen McCloy, a very respected mystery writer in her own right. I reviewed one of her books on this channel, The Slayers and the Slain, and I definitely recommend you check out Helen McCloy. She was a very interesting writer. She was always trying new things, often had a little bit of almost like a supernatural or haunting or occult or just a little something out of the ordinary in her books that made those books very fun to read and very, I guess, confounding in a good way, in that you never quite knew whether you were in a world of reality or whether something supernatural was poking its head through the door. Usually that turned out not to be the case, but if you're the kind of person who likes to go a haunting once in a while, and you also like psychological penetration, I want to give a little thumbs up here to Helen McCloy. So she and Brett must have had quite I could just imagine their marriage. They're not the first couple to be married. Other great mystery writers who were married, I think, include Bill Pronzini and Marcia Muller, and then, of course, Margaret Miller and her husband, Ken Miller, who went by the name Ross MacDonald with his Lou Archer mysteries. And, of course, there are many more. And I should just mention that Halliday was a Chicagoan by birth. But his Mike Shayne books are set in Florida. Michael Shayne is based in Florida. So let me tell you a little bit about the plot. It begins with a fairly young man who's about to turn 30, and he is getting death threats because he is about to take over a major coal mine in Kentucky. And he is sympathetic to the local labor. He believes that coal miners are not treated well. He believes that they deserve to be paid more and get treated better and have health care. So he's totally modern in his outlook. But Big Coal doesn't really like the idea that he might be willing to jump into bed with a union of coal workers. So he knows Michael Shayne by reputation He's been all over the newspapers, like detectives in early books, right? They often become world renowned or renowned within their country, so people know their names. So he writes to Michael Shayne and says, can you come to Kentucky, Centerville, Kentucky, and basically find out who's trying to kill me and protect my life? So Michael hops in his car with his secretary, the very capable Lucy Hamilton, and they get to Centerville. And by the time he gets there, our writer of the letter, Charles Roach, has indeed been murdered. So Shayne is too late, and Roach paid Michael Shayne in advance. So Michael Shayne feels compelled to stay and look into the murder, although he does wonder briefly, well, I already got paid and I came and he wasn't here and he's dead. So, do I just kind of take the 5,000 and consider my job done? But he doesn't. He decides to stay and investigate. And he rapidly realizes that Centerville, Kentucky is a very, very dirty town. The police are corrupt. The government is corrupt. It is one of those just corrupt town plots, which, we see occasionally and are a trope of the genre, and which Lee Child, does very well nowadays. But, you sort of know as you're driving into Centerville, it's not paradise, and that there are nasty things going on. The citizenry kind of lives in fear, and everybody is afraid to speak up. The cops are completely on the take, completely unethical and immoral. And into this walks Michael Shayne and proceeds to very rapidly make people hate him because they don't like outsiders. They don't like people who have a sense of morality, and they don't want anybody interfering with their business. And so with Lucy's help, Mike begins investigating. So that is the basic plot. So I'm going to tell you what I liked about the book and what I liked maybe a little bit less. Overall, I think it's a good book. The main reason I liked it is that it has some gravitas to it. It's not simply a light plot. It really does look pretty closely at labor issues and unionization and, big boss types, like boss hog types who want everything to themselves and want to give the workers nothing. And that's certainly an issue we have in the United States today and in the world, right, with our massive, massive income inequalities. And Halliday makes his murder victim someone who is sympathetic to labor unions. And so that makes the murder victim particularly sympathetic because he was a good man who wanted to do the right thing for the coal miners. Meanwhile, you see how many people hate the murdered man for exactly the same reason. And they are portrayed as, big, loud, money-grubbing, plutocrats, which is exactly what they are. But I did like seeing that sort of social realism in here that makes you at least think about some larger issues. I also liked the fact that the book was set in Kentucky. That's not a place I've been to a lot. It's always kind of nice to get out of the the New York, London, Chicago, San Francisco nexus. Unfortunately, it wasn't a very flattering portrait of this particular town in Kentucky. In fact, there's a saying in Centerville, Kentucky, "This is Centerville." And it's not said with love. It's not said with, oh, we have so much pride in our town. It's said with with the connotation of look the other way, don't make trouble, keep your mouth shut, or you could end up in a disgusting jail for 6 months without even a bed to sleep on. I mean, and that really does happen in this book. So the town is the quintessence of corruption. And I like books where there is a character who is strong enough to feel like he can take on a whole town, who's got the power and the smarts to be able to do that and outsmart the bad guys, which certainly Michael Shayne does. And I like that moral side to Mike Shayne, that he's looking to not only solve a crime but also to help the miners and help the town almost heal itself from this festering corruption that is rotting it, from the center. And I also found, I kind of like this, is that I now have in my head forever exactly what Mike Shayne looks like. He's drawn physically very, very carefully. He's tall, lanky, red-headed, knobby-kneed, bushy red eyebrows. There's a vision in my mind of what Mike Shayne looks like. And, different authors do different things with this. There's one school of thought that says, don't overly describe, because it's good to let readers bring something to their portrayal of that character in their own mind. And there's another school that says, no, your protagonist should really be very recognizable physically. And I thought Halliday did a really nice job with making Shayne very physically present in the book, and smart. There are a couple of things, though, that I liked less, let's say. And the first is the title, A Taste for Violence. I don't tend to go for these, what I call generic mystery titles that use the word murder or death or crime or violence in their title, because it becomes very hard to separate those books out, right? Because there's a lot of them. And I really am in favor of a title that kind of wows you and makes you grab that book off the shelf and makes you want to learn what it's all about. A Taste for Violence doesn't say anything to me. It doesn't hint at a plot. It just feels like a generic mystery title. So that could have been done better. Another slight problem is that the title refers not only to the town of Centerville and its corrupt people, leaders, if you can call them that, but for better or for worse, to Michael Shayne himself. So while on the one hand, he is a moral guy and can think beyond himself and look out for the common good, he is a bit of a thug. Some of his methods are pretty harsh and pretty violent. And I guess one could argue, as one does with, Reacher, that, in certain cases, violence is the only solution. And so Shayne does what he has to do. But some of the things that he did in this book didn't sit well with me. I thought they were sort of overkill. And he also becomes sort of a one-man vendetta, or judge, jury, executioner, all wrapped up into one. So whenever somebody sets themselves up to be sort of the sole moral arbiter, you've got a little bit of an issue with that, right? Or at least I do. In a way, you can think of Mickey Spillane's Mike Hammer being a similar character, right? Someone who's just going to bash heads together and do what he needs to do, engage in as much violence as he needs to meet his end. And I think Shayne is a little bit like that. He's also not above using his secretary, who's also kind of his girlfriend, to help him in the investigation, but he uses her as sort of getting her to pretend to be a loose woman so she can get men drunk and get information out of them. I mean, it's a tried and true method, right? Just ask any writer of spy thrillers. But I didn't feel like his relationship with his secretary was anything like it could have been. I think one of the real couplings of that type that you can look up to are Perry Mason and Della Street, who adored each other, and he treated her as an equal, and they had a wonderful bond. Lucy here is treated as kind of an also ran, or sort of a tool to be used in his investigations. But she doesn't seem to mind until she does, and then, everything gets resolved all at the end. I found the pacing a little bit slow on this one. I mean, the pages turned, and I read every one of them. I didn't skim, but it isn't really the suspense doesn't feel to me really like it's a major part of this book. It reads almost like a straight novel, and not so much of a mystery. Although I will say, when the mystery itself is resolved, it's a bit surprising in a good way, and it reinforces the theme of unions and workers and possible corruption. And so that's really what I'm going to take away from this book, is its sort of social awareness and its willingness to engage with, a deeper vein in our society, like specifically, coal miners who, those poor people. I mean, they had it and have it very, very rough, and deserve better than they get, and always have. And I'm not just talking in this country too. I mean, England and other coal mining countries. I mean, it seems like the poor miners are always treated like garbage, which is, needless to say, not good. So that's what I've got for you tonight. An interesting bit of Brit Halliday is, it is believed that after 1958, a lot of his Michael Shayne books were written by others. So I'm glad that I read one that was really written by Halliday, so that I could, truly get a sense of him as a writer, as opposed to someone who was just, channeling him to continue a series. And I'm just trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to say about this book, but I think that's pretty much it. I think you'll like it if you like hard-boiled and noir. The writing is fine. I guess I'd call it serviceable. It certainly will tug at your sense of justice and of right and wrong. And that's really all I've got to say about this one. I don't feel super compelled to run out and read more by Brit Halliday, but he was just enormously successful, so his books are really pretty easy to find. And he's an interesting case of one of these writers who was super successful in his day, but who was forgotten now, and surprisingly so. There's other writers that fall into that category, and we try to bring them to you on this channel. I'm thinking of writers like Doris Miles Disney, who was huge, but you don't hear anything about her these days. Charlotte Armstrong, whom I love, but you don't hear much about her these days, and, many, many others. Okay, so that's what I've got for you tonight. I've got Taste for Violence by Brett Halliday, and I will see you next time. Thank you.